So we're diving into this idea of inflammation in ALS. Can slowing down inflammation actually slow down the progression of ALS? It's a big question, and this 2015 study on a drug called Anakinra, well, it really got people talking.
It did.
Now, this is a pilot study.
Right.
Just a first look to see if a larger investigation would be worthwhile. But the results were definitely interesting, wouldn't you say?
Oh, for sure. Intriguing, for sure.
Now, for anyone who's maybe not as familiar with ALS,
Sure.
it's a tough one. It attacks those motor neurons, the ones that tell your muscles what to do. And as those neurons break down, you get paralysis, which eventually makes it difficult to breathe. And the hard part is, right now, there's no cure.
It's true. And the treatments are very, very limited, unfortunately. What's really got researchers' attention is this whole inflammation angle. We're not talking about your typical inflammation from like an injury, you know?
Right, right.
This is chronic, ongoing inflammation, but it's happening within the nervous system. It's like the immune system's getting its wires crossed, sending out all these inflammatory signals when it shouldn't. And certain immune cells, like the microglia, the astrocytes and T cells, these guys are supposed to be the body's defense team.
Right.
But they actually become overactive in ALS and start contributing to the problem.
So they kind of backfire in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, this isn't just showing up in ALS research.
Really?
Oh, yeah. We're seeing the same kind of neuroinflammation pop up in studies on other neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So, of course, it's got everyone wondering, could getting a handle on inflammation be a key to treating these diseases?
So that's where Anakinra comes in.
You got it.
Because it's already used to treat rheumatoid arthritis, which is another inflammatory disease, right?
Exactly. Anakinra works by blocking something called Interleukin-1, IL-1 for short. Think of it like this. IL-1 is the alarm bell, right? It triggers the whole inflammation process. Anakinra, it hits the snooze button on that alarm.
Interesting.
And you know, it's really interesting. Researchers found really high levels of an enzyme called caspase-1 in the spinal fluid of ALS patients. And guess what? Caspase-1 is the enzyme that activates IL-1. It's what flips the switch on that whole inflammation cascade.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got this drug, Anakinra, that can quiet down inflammation. And we're seeing this potential connection between inflammation and ALS. So I'm guessing that's why researchers were pretty interested to see if Anakinra could actually help.
Right, exactly. Plus, there were some preclinical studies using mice where they blocked IL-1. And it seemed to slow down the disease. Now, of course, mice aren't humans, but it was a promising clue. Definitely enough to get people thinking.
Right, like what if this could work for people too?
Exactly.
So they took Anakinra and they tested it with a group of ALS patients who specifically had lower motor neuron degeneration, LMND. So what's the significance of that? Why was that the focus?
Well, you see, with LMND, the disease is really hammering the motor neurons in the brainstem and the spinal cord. And researchers, well, they figured those neurons, maybe, just maybe, they'd be easier for the Anakinra to reach, and maybe, you know, more likely to actually respond to the treatment.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So walk me through how this study actually worked.
Sure. So they had 17 ALS patients, and they gave them daily injections of Anakinra for a whole year.
Wow. Every day for a year.
Daily injections alongside, oh, and this is important, they were also getting their regular medication, riluzole.
Okay, so it was in conjunction with the existing treatment.
Right. And one more thing, this was what we call an open label trial. It means everybody involved, they knew they were getting the Anakinra. No placebo this time.
Interesting.
Yeah, and really at this stage, it was more about safety. You know, seeing how well the patients tolerated it, not necessarily about getting that definitive proof that it actually worked against the ALS.
Got it. So safety first, but they were kind of keeping an eye on effectiveness too, right?
Oh, for sure. They were definitely measuring. They used the ALS FRSR scale. It's a common way to track how people with ALS are doing, you know, their functional abilities.
Okay.
But since they couldn't use a placebo in this pilot study, they had to get creative. So they used data from a previous group of patients, 47 of them, also with ALS, who hadn't received the Anakinra. Sort of a historical control group. Not perfect, but it gives you some perspective.
Right, some basis for comparison.
Yeah.
So let's talk safety then. Any red flags?
None at all. That was the good news. Anakinra, even combined with the riluzole, turned out to be safe, no big surprises, and patients tolerated it well, which, honestly, that's a really big deal when we're talking about ALS treatment.
Right.
Well, because patients, they're already susceptible to infections, you know, because of the breathing difficulties that come with ALS. So Throwing a new drug into the mix is always a bit of a gamble.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, Anakinra, so far so good.
That is fantastic news. Okay, but what about side effects? Anything to report there?
Just minor stuff, really. Some patients, they had a bit of a reaction at the injection site, which is understandable, a few headaches here and there. But the good news is those little annoyances, they tended to fade over time. And most importantly, no big surprises, no new safety concerns popping up, which is always what you want to see.
Absolutely. So we've established the drug seems safe, which is huge. But did it actually work against the ALS? Did they see any positive effects?
Wait, so that's where things get a little tricky. This is where we really see the limitations of a pilot study. They didn't find a statistically significant slowing of ALS progression overall.
Oh, so not a home run.
Well, not a home run yet, but not a strikeout either. Because there were these really interesting little hints in the data, important breadcrumbs.
Okay, I like breadcrumbs. Give me these breadcrumbs. What did they see?
Okay, so for one, the patients on Anakinra, they had a drop in fibrinogen. It's a key marker of inflammation. And that decrease, it stuck around throughout the entire study.
Interesting.
And even more promising, the levels of some other inflammatory villains like IL-6 and TNF, those guys cause a lot of trouble in ALS. Well, their levels initially went down after starting Anakinra, so that suggests that it was doing something right.
Okay, so it was fighting inflammation. But if it was working, why didn't they see a bigger impact? What happened?
Right, so remember those breadcrumbs, those promising clues?
Yeah.
Well, here's the twist. A full 94% of the patients, 94%, they developed antibodies against the Anakinra during the study.
Wow, 94%. That's huge.
It's way higher than what's typically reported, and it could mean that their bodies, their immune systems were basically saying, nope, not today, Anakinra. It was blocking the drug from doing its job effectively over time.
Oh, wow. So even though the drug was getting in there, fighting the good fight against inflammation, their own bodies were sort of putting up a defense against it.
Exactly. It's like the immune system going, hey, this Anakinra, it's an intruder, time to build some walls.
Oh, man, that's frustrating. But also kind of fascinating, right? Like, the body's defenses are so complex.
It really is amazing. But it definitely gives researchers something else to think about. Can we modify Anakinra, make it a little stealthier so the immune system doesn't see it as a threat? Or do we need to go back to the drawing board, develop entirely new drugs that target that same IL-1 pathway, but in a different way so we can bypass this whole antibody situation?
So not a slam dunk, but definitely not game over either.
Exactly. What this study really highlights is that targeting IL-1 inflammation could be a viable path forward. It's just a matter of figuring out how to do it effectively. We've got to overcome these hurdles, right?
So where do we go from here? What are the next steps for researchers diving into this Anakinra and ALS puzzle?
Well, they got to figure out this antibody roadblock, right? Is there a way to tweak Anakinra, camouflage it so the immune system doesn't see it as a threat? Or maybe, I don't know, encapsulate it somehow, help it sneak past those defenses. I mean, those are just ideas.
Yeah.
The other big thing, and this is crucial, we need larger trials. Way bigger, 17 patients.
That's a start.
It's a start, but with a sample size that small, even with those promising little hints, you just can't draw any big conclusions. We need to see how Anakinra performs in a much larger, more diverse group of people with ALS. That's the only way to know for sure.
Yeah, it really is like having this complex puzzle, right? In this study, it's like we found a few more pieces, but we're still missing a lot of the picture. It's like now we know where to look, but we need more pieces to really understand the full picture. One thing that's got me really curious here, and maybe this is a little out there, but this whole idea of personalized medicine.
Oh, yeah.
We're already seeing that in cancer treatments, using someone's genetics to create these super targeted therapies.
Yeah.
Could we do that with ALS and Anakinra, do you think?
Absolutely. I think that's got to be the future. Imagine you could analyze someone's genes, their immune profile, everything, and say, okay, based on what we're seeing, Anakinra, it's going to be a home run for you. Or, you know what? There's probably a better option out there. Let's explore that.
Wow.
That's where we need to go. It's not that far off either.
That is incredibly exciting. So to wrap things up for our listeners today, we've really dug deep into this study on Anakinra, this drug that's already used for rheumatoid arthritis and its potential for treating ALS. The study, it had some really promising findings, right? But there are definitely still some hurdles to overcome. But I think the big takeaway, the thing I hope everyone listening will remember, is that inflammation, it's not just some side effect. It's a key player in ALS. And if we can find ways to dampen that inflammatory fire, Well, who knows? It could lead to much more effective treatments, maybe even a cure someday.
And if there's one thing the study highlights, it's just how incredibly complex ALS is. It's not a one-size-fits-all disease, so we're probably not going to find a one-size-fits-all solution.
Very well said. This deep dive, yeah, it gave me a lot to think about. And I hope it did the same for you. Maybe it sparked some ideas, or maybe you're feeling inspired to learn more. Whatever it is, keep asking those questions. Keep seeking out information, because you never know what you might discover.